welcome.
Ceri's going to set up the slides. So I'll just start by saying hello. So Ceri and I, we have a lot of things in common that Paul just mentioned. Plus we are both from Wales in the UK. So if you think that our accents are, you're wondering where our accents are from, that's a Welsh accent. That'll be 2 Welsh accents there. So we'll just launch straight into things, I think, Ceri, yeah?
Yes. I think, Kath, you wanted to start by explaining a little bit about why we were talking about this today.
Exactly. So Ceri and I both feel very strongly about the need to do everything we can to look after the environment, to do our bit to help. In our personal lives, we do what we can, but also as a profession, we believe that it's important to address the whole issue of the climate disaster, the environment, sustainability, and this whole thing about eco-literacy. Don't be afraid if you are not familiar with that word. We weren't familiar with this word until very recently either, and that's the whole point of today's session. So over to you, Ceri.
Okay, so we're going to look first of all at the what of what is eco-literacy, in fact. Okay, you may already know, you may be forming definitions in your mind, but let's hold back on that a moment and let's just have a quick look first of all at the second half of the term, the word literacy. So before I show 2 definitions of literacy, I'd like you to just think for yourselves, what does literacy mean? And see which one of the 2 definitions is closer to yours. Okay, so what is literacy? And most dictionaries will give us 2 definitions of literacy. The first one is, let's say, the literal definition of literacy, the ability to read and write. And this word came into the language in the 1800s. And it's quite interesting that, in fact, the word illiterate came into the language before the word literate did. And obviously in the 1800s was when more and more people were learning to read and write. But we've moved on also to this second definition of literacy, the knowledge or capability in a particular field or fields. Now, this goes way beyond being able to read and write. It means having an understanding of a field. And so we can have fairly specific literacies. Can anybody think and type in the chat box of any specific kind of literacies? Maybe some of you attended the session by Nikki Hockley, which would be one particular. Okay, I'm seeing emotional literacy, digital literacy, yes, visual literacy, tech literacy, all of these different kinds of literacies. So eco-literacy, obviously, is also one of these. So before we look at eco-literacy itself, let's look at this idea of what being literate is and what being a literate citizen is. So here you have the verbs in bold. Just give us a little bit more detail about what that means to understand, to make informed decisions, and to act. This is what we expect a literate citizen to be able to do. And all of this in respect to complex topics and issues facing society today. And I think we'll all agree that the climate crisis is one of these complex topics and issues, and possibly the most important issue that we need to tackle, address, understand. So a literate citizenry will tackle social issues, and an eco-literate person, well, we'll come to that in a second. I just wanted to show you this graph. I don't know if you know the Google Ngram viewer. It's a fantastic function on Google. If you Google Ngram and you type in any word, it will give you the history of the use of that word. And what we can see here is that the word ecoliteracy is very much a new kid on the block. Kind of came into being in the mid 1980s and then surged in popularity. I'm not quite sure what that little downtick is. It may be because there are other similar literacies which have also gained in popularity more or less at the same time. So for example, sustainability literacy, ecological literacy, environmental literacy, they're all more or less covering the same area. In the references at the end of our session, there's a reference to a paper explaining and comparing all of these different literacies. But let's move on from that and think about this. Kath.
Okay, so an ecoliterate person is what? I'm going to invite you just to think for a minute and to write your ideas in the chat box. What is an ecoliterate person? So an ecoliterate person is someone who, just share your ideas in the chat box, okay? And don't be afraid of getting it wrong. You're not going to get it wrong, because there are going to be lots of very valid ideas here. Yeah, a person who takes care of the environment, a geographer, conscious, I love that one. A person who's knowledgeable, environmentalist. Oh my goodness, we're getting lots of fantastic answers in the chat box. I have to go back and read them later. Aware of their impact on the environment, I like that one. A person who cares, I like that one too. You're all saying either similar things or things that are very much connected with each other. They're excellent. So Ceri, can you put the next slide on, please? So we've got a definition here from this McBride article. And again, if you look at the highlighted words in black there, we can see more or less what you've been saying exactly in the chat box. Yeah, so an effective member of sustainable society. I like this bit, with well-rounded abilities of head, heart, hands, and spirit. So it's the whole consciousness, isn't it? It's not just one part of us that's engaged, if you like. So comprising an organic understanding of the world. And this last part here, participatory action, I think that's where Ceri and I come in, and what we are trying to do here. We are trying to participate, get involved, do some action as teachers, as writers, with our students, at home, as a global community. Okay, so I think you've all said the same things there. Yeah, Ruth, her holistic approach, know about the environment. So we're all on the same page here, I think. Ceri, can you move on, please? So why are we interested in ecoliteracy if at the end of the day we are English teachers first and foremost, language teachers, English teachers? Okay, Ceri, so why should we be interested in ecoliteracy if we belong to the ELT world? What's it got to do with us? Just think about this for a moment, and then we'll see what we think this link is. So if you'd like to put your ideas there in the chat box again. Simonette, you've already said we're all part of nature. We have the power to choose the content of our language lessons. Exactly. The beauty of teaching a language is that we can choose any content. We aren't limited to, it's not the same as if you're a maths teacher or a chemistry teacher. And I think with English especially, as it's such a global language and a lingua franca, again, we've got much more, we've got scope, haven't we, to bring in any kind of issues that we can. And so ecoliteracy is something that we can do, and probably something that we should be addressing. So let's have a look at the next slide to see what David Crystal has to say about this. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with David Crystal. So he says that Englishes are used in a multitude of contexts to express a diversity of views. He mentions global discourse and a medium for emerging ideas. And when you think about it, that's exactly what we are talking about when we are talking about ecoliteracy. We are talking about being able to express a diversity of views when we are talking with people and listening to people who are talking about climate disaster, changes in the environment, the loss of ecosystems, etc. They are hugely important global issues that we want to prepare our students to be able to, we want to arm them with the skills that they need, the linguistic skills, to be able to join in with these discussions. And we have another quote there. This is from the Australian National Curriculum. These links at the end, you'll get the references to be able to look them up further. And again, if you look at these verbs, which we've highlighted, I think they quite tie in nicely with the work that we do as teachers, because we're helping students to develop the skills to investigate, to analyze, to communicate, to advocate, generate, evaluate, all of these critical thinking skills that we've been hearing about for the past few years. They all come into this little quote, if you like, from the Australian National Curriculum. And that's what we can do as English teachers. We can equip our students with the skills that they need to develop to do exactly what it says on this slide. Okay, over to you, Ceri.
Another thing that we'd like to point out here is that the Australian National Curriculum is just one example. This quote is taken from their sustainability thread, which is a cross-curricular thread, which all teachers are being asked to include in their lessons. And this isn't something that's happening only in Australia. I'm sure it's happening in your countries to some extent, somewhere, that there will be this idea of including sustainability and environmental issues in the national curriculum. So I'd like to move on to talk quickly about this survey, the ELT Footprint Community Survey. First of all, maybe I need to explain what the ELT Footprint Community is. If you know of this community, can you just say yes in the chat box, please? Have you ever heard of ELT Footprint? Some yeses, some nos. Okay, so for the benefit of people who haven't heard of ELT Footprint before, this is an online community, basically, which centers on, but isn't only on Facebook. We have a Facebook group where members meet to share ideas, support each other, discuss what we can do about addressing, environmental issues in the ELT classroom. And last June, we held a survey and we asked teachers who were already interested in addressing these issues to answer a couple of questions for us about how they address issues, the problems they face, and the kind of support that they'd like to get. So I'm going to share a couple of questions with you, and I'm going to ask for your responses. So here's the first question. What do you hope to achieve by addressing environmental issues in your ELT classroom? So if you already do, or you feel that you would like to be able to include environmental issues in your lessons, what would be your aim? What would you be hoping to do? Okay, lovely. Lots of lovely responses coming in the chat box. I'm going to share with you in a moment a couple of the answers that we got in the survey, which were kind of typical of the kind of answers we were getting from our community members. And I think you'll see that they chime in a lot with what you're saying in the chat box. Okay, lovely. There's a lot of raising awareness, protecting the environment, continuing the conversation. Wonderful. Okay, let me share with you some of the answers that we got in the survey. So there we have to normalize, to make it part of the daily conversation rather than a throwaway unit on polar bears. So we have this idea that we want it to be integrated. Raising awareness is in there, and I saw raising awareness in the chat box a lot. Giving students the tools that they need and the language that they need. This came up again and again. Making classroom activities more relevant to the students' world, to the students' lives, to, as we saw earlier in that quote, to the big issues facing society today. So these are real topics in the classroom. And the last quote, we have this idea of encouraging not only awareness, but also positive action, so that through knowledge, through awareness, then people move closer to taking positive action. Okay, so that was what was the first question, and I can see that a lot of you are definitely on the same page as the people who were responding to the survey. Maybe there's someone here who did respond to the survey. I didn't ask that question earlier, so thank you very much if you did. And the second question was more about the obstacles that we might face. So what might make it difficult for us to include environmental issues in our classrooms? What factors then inhibit teachers? So maybe not us, because maybe we are doing it, but what about the teachers who haven't started yet, who are worried about doing it? Okay, so I can see curriculum jumping up. Thank you very much, Maria, was it, who did complete the survey? Fantastic. The students' interests, cultural issues, not interested in science, okay? Limitations in the syllabus, lack of knowledge. Okay, lovely. Time wasting. And yes, let me share with you some of the answers, and let me give you a few moments to read through them. And you'll see that, again, it's chiming in with what you're saying in the chat box. The word fear is repeated twice. So one fear is of irrelevance. So this is the curriculum and also the students' interests. Is it going to be irrelevant? The next idea is this idea of the topic being so enormous. And how do we go about it? How can we address it? So there's this idea of not really being certain how to address the topic. And again, fear of the size of the topic. And basically, it kind of boils down to this balancing act of the language competencies and the environmental issues. And we had this one respondent who very succinctly in 3 words said, no clear framework. So this is where I'm going to hand over to Kath.
Thanks, Ceri. So this whole idea about there not being a clear framework is where Ceri and I are kind of coming from today, because we agree that in many cases there is no clear framework. So what happens is that maybe in one school, in one class, a teacher might try something without really thinking about how it fits in with everybody else or what the language aims are, etc., etc. Frameworks are useful. Teachers like frameworks. We like frameworks. First of all, I'm assuming that people are familiar with the word framework, but if you aren't, don't be afraid to ask in the chat box. And in Europe, I think the most familiar framework that we often refer to, and outside Europe too, but is the Common European Framework reference. So I'm going to just write that in the chat box. Yeah, CEFR, we did that at the same time, Ceri, where we have the language levels, yeah, A1, A2, B1, B2. And this framework was created to be able to standardize language levels, not only for English, across Europe, and I think it's kind of extended into other areas as well. You might have in your context other frameworks that you use for your teaching or your teacher training or whatever work you're doing in ELT. When we have a framework, everything is easier. We've got something to hold on to. We've got something to measure things against. We can kind of form a pathway. We have support, and that's what we're looking at today. So if you'd like to move on to the next slide, Ceri, we've decided to explore some frameworks, and we have decided to look at one framework in particular. So if you want to put the next slide, Ceri. And this comes from, we've borrowed this framework. It comes from a college in the United States, and we'll share the link with you in the references on the last slide. There will be other frameworks that will be similar all around the world, I'm sure, but we quite like this framework. And if you look at it, it says an ecoliterate person is someone who has the ability to, so you can compare what you wrote earlier when you wrote what an ecoliterate person is, and you can compare it to some of these, and as you'll see, you came up with a lot of the same things. So what we've done here, we've taken this as it is from the framework used in this particular college, and we've highlighted the verbs because that can help us to transfer these competencies into can-do statements. Ceri, do you want to flip back and forward again to show that how they're the same thing? So understand significant environmental problems and their causes, and then if you look over, can understand and explain, etc., etc. So we just use the framework as a starting point, if you like, to come up with some can-do statements. So the good thing about the can-do statements is that by looking at them now, we can easily see the language functions that we need to focus on in our classes with our students, because we need to remind ourselves, obviously, we are English teachers. First and foremost, we are teaching English. So we can look at these can-do statements, we can choose some, and we can ask ourselves, how can we teach this language so that our students will be able, at the end of a task or an activity or a lesson, to be able to tick these can-do statements, if you like. So if we have a can-do statement and it's well written and we've thought it through, then we've got a very clear learning outcome. And that's what we usually want to have in our lesson plan, isn't it? We start our lesson plan by thinking of the learning outcomes, and then what are we going to do to get there? And that's kind of what we're doing here. So let's look at the first can-do statement. So this one, can express appreciation of the natural world in their immediate surroundings. Okay, so this kind of links back to things like the role of empathy and awe and hope and positivity, and it highlights a little bit about how this environmental can-do statement, it has a clear linguistic focus because we can teach them how to express appreciation, and it's kind of very easy to understand, I think. I'm just going to mention a quick anecdote here, that while Ceri and I were doing some research, and we came across some articles, interesting articles from around the world, work that was being done in the whole area of eco-literacy, if you like. And I read an interesting article that it was about an experiment that was done in a Japanese university. And what they did, they spoke to a group of students in a library, and they were talking about their beliefs in how the students believed, what they believed in terms of looking after the environment and having sustainability at the core of their behavior. And they did a poll, and they asked what students would do if they saw a newspaper that had been just thrown on the floor within the university grounds. And all of the students said that they would pick up the newspaper. I think the choices were pick up the newspaper, leave it there, or maybe tell somebody about it. And everybody said they'd pick it up. But what the students didn't know was that this was an experiment in itself. And outside that library, when they were leaving, there was a newspaper on the floor, and they were being observed. And of course, nobody picked it up. So there was a big disconnect between what the students said they would do and then what they actually did. And I can see in the chat box, some people are saying that if it was on the road, they might not pick it up, etc. if it was at home. So I think what we're trying to do here, and I think what's important to keep in mind, is that we don't want to, we want to make sure that we give that message to our students of to think of things that they will do and to do it, to walk the walk as well as talk the talk, as we say. We want to foster real interest and empathy, and we need to think of ways of doing that. So if you want to move to the next slide, Ceri. We came across this term in our research as well, place-based eco-pedagogy. We quite like this term, and I think that this is key, and it ties into what we've read and heard about localization and personalization to get our students motivated and engaged. So at the moment, I am in Europe, okay? I'm in the Northern Hemisphere, and autumn is just starting where I am and where many of you are too. And so at this time of year, an example of the things we can be doing in classes, we can be talking about what happens in autumn, we can be talking about the seasons. What happens in autumn where I live is this. I don't know if you're going to be able to see this. This is, it's not real, it's a wooden model of a very special kind of mushroom that only grows at a certain height between 600 meters and 800 meters, and oak trees in a certain climate for about 5 weeks of the year. So for me, it's a very special time of year at the moment, because we pick these mushrooms and we eat them. And children learn about them, and they learn about how, when we go into the forest, we have to respect everything that we come across. We can't just kick things around, etc. And there's all kinds of things that we can do related to autumn, and with children especially, collecting leaves, making collages, and getting them to look and to show awe, empathy, wonder about this amazing world. So in the next slide, Ceri, I think we've got a picture of what's happening in the Southern Hemisphere at the moment. If you are just going into spring at the moment, just write yes in the chat box, and you'll be seeing flowers like this and blossom. And I'm going to ask a question. What could you do at this time of year in spring with your students to help them develop those emotions, that emotional idea of the wonderful world that we live in. Yeah, the flower is beautiful, absolutely. And we could, like, maybe they could have a photograph, a shared photograph display of flowers and plants around the place, etc., etc. Go on picnics. I like that one. It's spring in Peru. Well, there you are. In Peru, you won't be collecting these mushrooms. You'll be doing something much more spring-like. But the whole idea is that we're teaching our students to love the planet. So on that note, I'm going to ask Ceri to move on.
Yeah, and we're going to look now at a second can-do statement. So can-do statement number 2 is can understand and explain the concept of greenwashing and give examples. Okay, so this term greenwashing is relatively new. I know that it's being taken into quite a few languages as a borrowed word, or it's being translated directly into the language. So my first thing that I would do with my students, if I was planning a lesson for this particular can-do statement, would of course be to ask them to define greenwashing if they can. So what about you? Can you define greenwashing? Have you heard of greenwashing? Many students will not have heard of it, but they maybe can guess. Can you guess? No? Okay, I'm seeing some. Yeah, okay. Never heard of it before? That's not a problem, because a lot of students haven't heard of it before. And it's interestingly, it was one of those competences that was in the second level. We've got a reference for you where this college in the US had this particular competence as a second level competence. So I'm going to show you a definition of greenwashing. I've taken this definition from a Greenpeace article, and we're sharing the link with you in the last screen, but also in a PDF that you'll be receiving. You'll be receiving a copy of our slides, and you'll have all of the references and links there. So here we go. This is the definition for greenwashing. Okay, so it's a public relations tactic, a marketing tactic, to make a company or product appear environmentally friendly, but only to appear. So it's an appearance and not substance. So I took this definition from a Greenpeace article, and I would share this headline with my students, and Greenpeace suggesting that we're living in a golden age of greenwash, and they share a couple of examples. So using quotation marks, the carbon neutral flight or the net zero bacon. Here are two of their examples. Can you think of examples of products that might be greenwashing, that might be promoting themselves by saying that they're doing something that's good for the environment, but actually they're not? Sustainable tuna fishing, I can see coming up a couple of times. Yeah. Oh, vaping. Yes, the electrical smoking. Zero emission cars. Strawless McDonald's. Yes, now that was a really interesting one, because they changed from plastic to paper, didn't they? But they weren't strawless. Okay, lovely. So obviously there are lots and lots of examples, and once we get our students to start thinking about it, they'll come up with examples too. And I really like the idea of creating a rogues gallery. Are you familiar with the idea of a rogues gallery? Maybe Kath, you can write that in the chat. A rogues gallery is it was like the old wanted posters in police stations in the Victorian ages, where they would have drawings of criminals from the local area, and they'd just show the pictures, and those were the rogues. Well, what I'm suggesting is that maybe we could have a poster, either a real poster or an online poster, for our classrooms, where we could collect examples of these greenwashing rogues. So now I'm going to share with you some slogans. Okay, these are 4 real-life slogans taken from industries, companies who have been accused of greenwashing. And what I'd like you to do is to look at the 4 of them and imagine what product you think they're selling. If you know the company, you can name the company. But what I'm thinking about now is the product. So what products are each one selling? Okay, I'm getting paint. That's probably the picture that's suggesting paint. I'm afraid none of them is paint. Flights. Yes, somebody got flights for the 4th one. Lowest fares, lowest emissions. That is an airline company. I'll leave you to guess which one. Fuel, clothes, absolutely. Reimagining energy. Yep, that's a fuel one. That is an oil company who were using this as one of their advertising slogans and actually had to stop using it because they were taken to court. Fashion, obviously, that one is the fast fashion, this idea of cheap clothes made using cheap labor. And let's remember that environmental issues overlap with social issues. They can't be separated. They're one and the same thing. So there is a famous fast fashion line who were using this particular slogan and got slapped on the wrist for it. And every drop is green. This is a fairly recent campaign that I think if you follow Greenpeace on Instagram, you might come across it. This is mineral water or bottled water. So a bottled water company that was using the slogan, every drop is green, and selling the water in plastic bottles. Also selling the water from a country where around 15% of the population have no access to clean drinking water. So possibly because this company is selling their water for a lot of money in plastic bottles. Okay, so these are 4 examples that would go straight into the rogues gallery for me. Okay, so that would be my lesson plan to help students with greenwashing. And Kath, a few words about this photo.
Yeah, okay. I love that idea of a rogues gallery. I'm actually seeing, you know, wanted posters along the class. You could make a fantastic display. So this is a photo of from Highfly airline company, and Ceri actually saw this photo in she saw it in somewhere, and she thought, oh, what a great photo, we could use that in our presentation, but we don't have the copyright to use it. So she sent an email to the company, and they asked if she could use it for an educational presentation, and they said yes. So she got permission to use it. I'm not sure whether they'd be happy with what we're going to do about it, but if you're not sure whether you've got permission to use a photo and you want to use one, always ask, send an email to us, because in most cases they'll say yes, I think. So this is a tray on an airplane. They're on a flight. It says, welcome to the first single-use plastic-free flight in the world. Now, how would you use this with a class? I'm just going to ask you that question, throw it out there. If you've got any ideas at all, just pop them in the chat box. And I suppose the questions here, we could have a discussion. So we could say, are they greenwashing? Because on the one hand, I think they've got bamboo cutlery. They haven't got any single-use plastic objects like knives and forks, but it's a flight, so it seems a little bit crazy in that respect. As Helen said, aluminium foil, And Liliana says, yes, they are greenwashing. Maybe you could have a debating class, those who are on the side of the airline and those who are criticizing them. What other things could you do with this photo? I think a photograph, an image is perfect to prompt discussion, to get people thinking about vocabulary, applying recycled items, yeah, debating. You could ask them maybe to write an email to the company, or to maybe write 5 questions they would like to ask the chairman of the company, brainstorm, talk about reuse versus single use. I'm just reading what you're putting here in the chat box. So some absolutely brilliant ideas. And then when it comes to language as well, you can
let's revisit the can-dos to see what ones we might be hitting there.
Exactly. So here, if you have a look, we've highlighted in green some of the can-do statements that we've addressed, if you like, in the ideas that we've shared. So we've got 4 there that we've highlighted. And the beauty of these can-do statements is that you can write your own, and you can write them in simple language or more complex language to suit the students that you're teaching. If you're teaching children or adults, if you're teaching low levels, A1, if you're teaching higher levels, you can decide how to word those can-do statements, thinking about the language that you're going to be teaching. So, Ceri, I'm going to let you talk about the ELT Can-Do Eco.
Okay, thank you, Kath. So sorry to rush you, but we're coming to the end of our time. And Kath and I today would really like to launch this hashtag. So it's the ELT Can Do Eco, and it has 2 meanings. First of all, it's we would really like to start sharing can-do statements which bridge this gap between ELT and eco, and that are concrete and practical and that help us as teachers, as trainers, as material writers to bring the environmental issues into the classroom. But we also want this to be a kind of a battle cry. So it's like, yes, you can, but our battle cry is ELT can do eco. Those obstacles we talked about earlier, they don't really stand in our way. So that we are now sharing this hashtag, and we've just posted a blog post that we're going to give you the reference for, and we're going to be sharing this hashtag on Twitter, on Facebook, on LinkedIn, anywhere where you can find the ELT print community. You'll be able to find this hashtag, okay, starting from this evening, because the blog post should, in fact, it will be going live in 15 minutes. Okay, Kath, anything to add?
No, I think that there are quite a few people said at the beginning that you were not familiar with ELT footprint. So this is us. And the ELT footprint community, it's a global community with nearly 4,000 members all around the world. And if we invite you to come along, join in, come to the Facebook group page, join us. We share information and advice, ask questions, etc. And then on the website, we share resources, etc. So if you are interested, please join in. Yes, Kate, everybody's welcome. Everybody's welcome. So I think that's everything. There's the links here, and you will be getting a PDF of this, I believe. Paul will tell us about that in a minute. And now I think we're ready for questions and answers. But yeah, brilliant, I'm just brilliant chat.
Quickly talk you through what we've got here in the links and references. The first is an article about the various different environmental literacies, which gives a lot of background if you're interested in that. The second is the Australian curriculum and the sustainability spread. The third one is where we took those competencies from the US College. That's a really interesting paper to look at as well, because it goes beyond just that list. Here's a link to the Greenpeace article and definition of greenwashing, a link to an article where I saw the photo of the single-use flight. Is really interesting there because they are trying to do some environmentally friendly stuff. So I think it does lend itself very well to a pro and con debate. And finally, the last link is not actually live yet, but will be in 12 minutes. This is where we're launching our hashtag of ELT Can Do Eco. Thank you, everyone.
Lovely. Marvelous. What a fantastic idea. Can-do statements. I love it. It's really, yeah, brilliant. How many have you got? How many are there so far?
How many?
None. We're waiting
well,
for you.
those ones that we've shared with you, we're starting out.
Okay. Okay.
But there are lots of frameworks around that we don't have to reinvent the wheel here. It's really a question of, like we did in the presentation, taking competencies from the environmental frameworks and just looking at them and giving them, if necessary, a language twist, but most of them already have a language twist, because it's either receptive, so it's understanding, and in that case it's looking at texts. Texts are so key, or productive, where you're explaining, you're describing, advocating. I love teaching students to advocate. That's one of my favorites. Yeah. So there's lots of them.
Right.
We can borrow the ideas from the existing can-do statements too, from the common European framework. So, so for example, for children, when it says can understand, a dialogue about whatever, we can change what the topic is, so that, you know, so we tick in the, it gives it a positive slant as well, because they can see at the end what they can do. I mean, what's not to like.
Yeah.
So that one, Kath, for example, just thinking could be can understand a dialogue about trees in their local context, and so then you're bringing it into the whole place-based as well, and tying it, like, you know, cementing it to the students' lives and stuff that they're familiar with, and maybe open their eyes to them in a different way.
I guess, I mean, it's something that schools can kind of take wholesale and actually use as part of their whole kind of system. It doesn't necessarily, I mean, obviously we're English language teachers, but it probably works. I mean, it works across subjects to some extent. I mean, can-do statements can be built for other subjects. I'm sure there are frameworks for other subjects anyway. I guess, I mean, I'm really fascinated by this actually. So in the same, and you might have mentioned this, but in the same way, I suppose with the can-do statements, with the Council of Europe, obviously they're sort of based on level. You mentioned, did you mention levels, or was that not something? Sorry, I might have missed it because I was monitoring a chat on Facebook.
I mentioned levels because we write our own can-do statements. We can write them to suit the levels that we're teaching. So we could actually, hopefully we will come up with a whole list. I mean, I'm just looking ahead now. Ceri and I are quite excited about this, but hopefully in a not too distant future, we will be able to provide lists of can-do statements for, you know, A1 or beginner, intermediate, whatever, or different age groups, whatever. We'll have a look at that.
A little bit like the CFR framework. There's the idea that the same can-do statement is seen time and time again, but with a different level of complexity or sophistication. So it would be like in a slow conversation between friends, but then it would be in an academic text. You know, so if you're at C1, you'd be expected to be able to understand the arguments from an academic text. If you're A1, then you'd be expected to understand it in a simple conversation between friends, for example. So it happens already with the pure language competencies, and it definitely can happen with this one.
Okay.
These
Brilliant.
ones.
Yeah.
You hear it here. You heard it here first.
Yay!
I know. A world exclusive. And you were sort of saying, so the idea you want people to, you want to invite people to contribute as well. So it's kind of a crowdsourced thing as well. So obviously, I mean, I guess, you know, living in Europe, you know, the focus for us is, I suppose we have a sort of a certain Euro focused or Euro shaped view of things to some extent, one way or another. But obviously, sort of crowdsourcing can-do statements, you're going to get things that you might not have even kind of thought about from different parts of the world, where, you know, it's just, yeah, no, that's great.
Absolutely.
Yeah, that's what we're hoping for, because you know, that everybody, we didn't have time to talk about this, but if we'd asked this question, everybody, no matter where they live in the world, I am absolutely convinced, without a shadow of a doubt, that they will have an environmental issue on their doorstep. And we don't know about them. It might be a river that's polluted, or you know, we don't know what's happening. I know what's happening on my doorstep, but I don't know what's happening to some of our friends there in Bangladesh and Ukraine and everywhere else that, you know, where people are today. So that's a great thing, because together we can, if we can make a huge list of these can-do statements and get everybody involved, then we can start understanding each other's situations too, because we sometimes see things from a very Eurocentric place. I'm aware of that myself. Or we might say, you know, we shouldn't be doing this, but if somebody's living in a different context, you know, that might seem petty, and their issues might seem much more, you know, it's going to be a learning opportunity for Ceri and myself as well.
I'd like to point out as well that one of the pillars of eco-literacy, whether you call it eco-literacy or sustainability literacy or environmental literacy, there are lots of labels, is the understanding the interconnectedness of everything across the globe. So maybe we start small with our primary kids with the place-based eco-pedagogy, which means we're helping them to understand how ecosystems work in their context, so that they start to learn about interconnectedness as a concept, because it's such a basic concept for these literacies. And so if we can start to include that, as you said, Paul, like across the curriculum, because it can be part of everything. It can be part of music and art and, you know, PE, as well as biology and geology and physics, and, you know, so it's totally extracurricular. And so one of the things that an eco-literate person should be able to do is have an awareness and understanding of interconnectedness. So we need to learn this too. None of us are 100% eco-literate, I don't think. Like, you know, I don't know, there are the, you know, I can think of a couple of names probably who are, but
and then it ties in with a lot of the other global issues too, because questions, you know, to do with equality, for example, you can't separate these two things, because usually in most, you know, usually the people who are most suffer most because of the damage that we're doing to the planet are those very people who are you know, they've got very little, or they, you know, everything's connected, and that's good. And by doing all this, I suppose one thing I'm thinking of, especially with children, but also with adults, is that whole, by learning about these things, we will also be thinking and developing skills of, you know, empathy and tolerance and, you know, listening and this kind of thing. So it kind of all goes
Kath, what was
together.
that quote? Was it hands, hearts, and spirit? I'm missing one.
Yeah,
heads.
heads.
Yeah.
Wait, I can feel a primary song or
Yeah.
chant coming, you know.
Heads, hands, hearts, and
hearts and
spirit.
spirit.
Yeah.
Eco. Oh, I'm gonna.
Get in the recording studio, Kath.
Yeah, spot the primary teacher in
Yeah,
the room.
right. I know. Yeah. But it's interesting what you just sort of saying there, like, Kath. I mean, there's it's a question. It's sort of, I suppose, a comment as well around the Sustainable Development Goals, and obviously, you know, education's a key one of those, and environmental kind of issues is another kind of key area within that. But they're, like you say, they are all kind of interconnected, and I think you know, education sort of being, to me anyway, I think being central to that. You know, everything can kind of come from that, and if we can get people when they're young and educate them, and they can kind of involve themselves in this, and using the can-do statements is going to be a fantastic way to do that. Then, you know, the hope obviously is that you know, as they get older, the majority of people will actually be not just aware of kind of climate issues, but you know, be keen to kind of do something, and be doing something sort of proactively in their lives, sort of on a day-to-day basis. So it's yeah, I think it's fantastic. It's a really fantastic initiative. So thank you, both of you, for doing this. Really,
thank you for having
really
us. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you for giving us this platform to launch our hashtag.
And thanks to the participants for being so amazing, because the chat was just zooming up so fast. It was just brilliant to see all those people around the world.
Just seen a great comment from Anna Petru saying, "Thank you for the great webinar. I had tea and jam biscuits at one hand and a pen in the other, taking notes."
Oh, good.
Wonderful. Wow. And following the webinar. That's really multitasking.
Oh, somebody's asking there, what is the song? I mean, there's a chat thing there.
Watch this space.
What is the song? So we need to maybe write a blog post about that song, or maybe I'll record myself singing it and share it in
you have to write that song, I think.
You do.
Yeah.
Kath